Do you have any bizarre or unexpected experiences that you've run into as a property manager? Everybody has that crazy story. What's your story?
There's always a great story. Mine actually was one of the first experiences with property management, probably the first year. We go over to a property to do an inspection. I go into the basement and there's chickens in the basement. All of the things that you would think about chickens in a basement, they were not true in this case. It was one of the cleanest basements I've ever seen. Yeah, that was the first thing that I saw was chickens in a basement. So I said they had to get rid of them. You always want them to be accommodating, and they were in this case.
Welcome to Matcha with Mammoth, without matcha, unfortunately today.
Hey, I got a good sparkling water, so
Yeah.
I'll take that.
You got the Pellegrino.
Yeah.
So we're keeping it non-caffeinated today because it's so late in the afternoon, right?
Way to have it. You don't want me caffeinated, trust me.
Yeah, you're gonna be even more on the rails, right?
Pretty much.
Awesome. So tell me about how you got into property management initially. What do you do now? How'd you get into it?
Yeah, so my previous life, I was a high-powered engineer. I used to work both in fusion research and fission research. I would have a nuclear engineering degree. Got pretty disconcerted with the engineering, and in 2018, I decided to quit and ultimately become a property manager. The impetus for property management, though, went way before that. I have 4 brothers, no sisters, and my dad has always done real estate. And so he showed me that on a teacher's salary, which we know teachers don't make much, and he's been retired for 10 years, you can acquire over time a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio if you just hold forever. So I saw this man who, was great with his hands, but was not mathematically inclined, didn't know how to evaluate real estate, make $1 million real estate portfolio. When you saw so many people that were struggling just to pay their bills each month, making so much more than he did. And so from there, I always had this bug for real estate. A bunch of my brothers do as well. And so when I moved back to Connecticut in 2008, after being in San Diego for 4 years, I was strongly looking to start buying real estate as a means for me, like my father, to acquire a $1 million real estate portfolio. So in 2018, when I decided to quit working as an engineer, I had already had something like 15 properties, 30-something units, and knew that I wanted to be in real estate in some form. My brother owns a property management company as well. And so it's kind of interesting having a competitor who is also your brother. But he's very gracious. We niche out in slightly different ways, and so we're able to be cooperative as well. But we do compete in some markets. But he was gracious enough to have me incubate underneath him. He even seeded some properties besides the ones that I owned personally that he was thinking about getting rid of because they were for more strategic investors, which is what I speak. And he was really more focusing on what we call accidental landlords. Maybe someone that had to go overseas for a few years and didn't want to sell, but never intended to be an investor. So that's kind of where we started, and I've been doing property management ever since.
Interesting. I think one of our friends, Ryan, he happened into it the same way. He started off with, the real estate work while working a corporate job, and then he ended up leaving to do real estate full time. So
sure,
it sounds like somewhat similar path there.
Yeah.
So what are some of the biggest challenges you faced, coming up from essentially starting from zero, right? Starting from zero and getting to where you are now. What are the challenges?
Yeah. So I've always been good at engineering type activities, solving problems, process implementation, implementing systems. But when you're strong in one thing, you're generally weak in another. And so I've always been a little bit more weak on the people side. And so inspiring people, training people, managing people, doing culture type activities, trying to really make sure that everything is being done well so that people feel valued. That's not my cup of tea. So the first couple of years, it was me and maybe 1 or 2 other people. And so it was relatively easy to actively manage. More recently, we have a bigger team. We have about 12 total people, including myself. Many of them are not even in Connecticut. So, there's additional challenges to having a remote staff and trying to get the best out of them. And so that's really been the biggest challenge for me, is the transition from kind of the person that does it all himself to building teams, building a leadership team, and inspiring people to become their best.
Got it. So how has nuclear engineering prepared you for property management?
That's great. I love that you said that right. It's not nuclear, it's nuclear, right? There's no extra U in that word that so many people say incorrectly. No, going back to what I just said, really that's the mind I have to solve problems, process, how you go about and have logical arguments for things, for making decisions, for frameworks. That's really what engineering is. That's really what problem solving is. So on that side, I've always been strong. I've also, from that, I always had a very strong obsession about finding all my hidden pennies, right? So I love accounting, which many in my industry don't. I love to make sure that all of the money is accounted for, which is one of the most important things a property manager can do, because you are a steward and a protector of the money of your clients. And so that's another thing that, like, my brain, my experience as an engineer, just an obsession about, money and solving problems has very clearly translated into the property management industry.
I see. And I know you're a policies and procedure guy with checklists everywhere. Did a lot of that come from your background in engineering, or is that something that you kind of developed along the way as a necessity?
Yeah, so it's definitely a necessity in the property management industry. When I was doing fission research in Connecticut and Westinghouse, we had a lot of checklists, a lot of policy documents. And so there was a logical way of doing business. For the first few years, I really followed the playbook that my brother had started. But with time now, I've kind of built out my own playbook. For me, it started with some technology. So you've got things like Asana and Process Street and things like that are more off the shelf for bigger audiences of companies that could be in many different industries. There's some that are very specific to the PM industry, and some of them started coming into effect probably about 3 or 4 years ago. And when that happened, I really strongly gravitated to them, because they allowed me to have some additional efficiencies that I didn't with standard process softwares. Things like automations of emails and text messages, telling me when to have phone calls. And some of those build-outs really logically went in with installing the checklists through that process.
Got it. Which do you prefer? The one, like the checklist I should say the SaaS product that's made as a general checklist, or the industry-specific checklist software?
I would say if there's ever an industry-specific software, you should explore that first. A lot of the benefits of the industry-specific software is that they are niching down so specific that they're meeting your individual unique needs. So in my specific case, I was one of the beta testers of the software. And so a lot of the things that I was telling them I needed, they implemented right away. Now that they've gotten bigger, most of the things that I asked them to do gets onto a wish list for the future. Mm-hmm. But for a while, it was like, okay, you need this. Yep, got it. And so what I love about it is to a large extent, it was literally designed for me. And so I advocate for this company all the time. They're called Lead Simple, and they started as a CRM company. And there's some logical synergies between a CRM company and a process company, based on how they built their company. And so, but yeah, I would say industry specific is in general better than a generic off the shelf.
Great. My experience has really been in the automation side of things. So when you try to automate things or do anything advanced, usually those industry-specific softwares just fall flat. They just don't support it. So we've run into challenges on that side, but property management, I would assume there's a good amount of integrations in your software with the property management softwares like Yardi and Rent Manager and things like that.
Yeah, so what's interesting about it is the software companies frequently don't like to play nice. So no API integrations frequently. We've been really pushing as an industry hard to do that so that the integrations can be more seamless. And some of that's been happening. So initially, when they weren't playing nice, we would have to do daily feeds of information that then that were essentially reports that would then get embedded into this program, and they would know how to take that information and do something with it. But now they have at least one-way feeds where they can pull down information like every 5 minutes to be able to update. And that's powerful. But ultimately, if we could do two-way syncs back and forth, it would make double entry accounting a lot easier. So there's still a ways to go, and we're asking these companies to do it. I'm starting to become a little bit more influential in the industry, and so I get some ability to ask these vendors to do things that they should be doing all along.
Yeah. We've actually developed our own API integration into Yardi and Rent Manager. That's why I asked, because it was a big challenge to actually integrate into them. They're very specific. They didn't always have API access. That's something that was relatively recent that they came out with. And it was a lot of work, but we have a one-way sync. Technically, you can do a two-way sync, but we try not to do it that way because for our systems, we wanted to only go and them to use Rent Manager or Yardi as their single source of truth. And then as soon as they make a change, it adds the person into their tenant call box at the outside of the door, and it adds a fob into their access control system. And they don't have to learn any other systems. The property manager just learns Yardi or Rent Manager, whatever portal they're using, and everything works as expected.
Nice. There's a lot of the other ones that are also now allowing, I think, that type of thing. So I'm an Appfolio shop, and then there's another company called Rentvine, and I know they're all doing API integrations. From what I've heard, Rent Manager has not been updating as much their software and trying to keep it like a lot of the other ones have. So a lot of my peers are strongly considering going away from Rent Manager. And in the space that I'm in, we never really used Yardi. Yardi is bigger for, probably bigger apartment buildings. A lot of my stuff is smaller scatter site apartments. And so we've always been an Appfolio shop. So
Got it. Who's the best in the industry now that you've seen as a Rent Manager or Yardi type competitor?
Yeah, so there's a lot of people would debate who is the best. For a while, we would not have said Appfolio because their customer service was very lacking. Recently, they've heard what we've been speaking, and I would say they're probably still the best. The one that is trying to be a real competitor is one called Rentvine. They're relatively new. They're building their platform based on great customer service. They're not publicly traded. And so I would say they're the strong number two that we would, in general, recommend people look at if they're trying to change accounting softwares. So, but I'm in Appfolio. Lately, I've been very happy with them. For a while, a few years ago, I was strongly considering going away from them. But everyone knows how hard it is to change systems, especially from the accounting platforms. So it is a big task that people would rather get all of their teeth pulled out than go ahead and make the change. It's that evil.
We've experienced it, and I can say getting everybody on board is a tall task, to say the least. So I don't envy them if they're going through that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So switching gears, do you have any bizarre or unexpected experiences that you've run into as a property manager? I feel like everybody has that crazy story. Somebody's calling them in at 2 a.m. in the morning, So what's your story?
There's always great stories. Mine actually was one of the first experiences with property management, probably the first year. We go over to a property to do an inspection. I go into the basement, and there's chickens in the basement. And, all of the things that you would think about chickens in a basement, they were not true in this case. It was one of the cleanest basements I've ever seen. They cleaned it like daily. I think because if you don't keep it clean, they can get like parasites and stuff. So they really had to keep it clean. But yeah, that was the first thing that I saw was chickens in a basement.
Wow.
Yeah. It was actually in New Britain.
Really?
Yeah.
How did you fix that?
I told them that it's a health code violation to have chickens in the basement. I can't tell them they can't have them, even though there's specific rules in New Britain that you can't have, fowl, chickens and other ducks and things on site. And so I said they had to get rid of them.
Wow.
Yeah. And they complied. It would be one of those situations where you say, like, look, if you don't get the chickens out, I'm going to have to evict you. Right. And inevitably, you always want them to be accommodating. And they were in this case. But that's where you really have to, unfortunately, follow the process, start evictions, let people know that the reason why they're being evicted is because they have chickens in the basement. Come up with another solution.
So, piggybacking off of that, how do you keep ownership happy while also keeping tenants happy?
Yeah, so it's really a fine line. But I would say the best strategy is we become an intermediary. So what does that mean? It means that when a tenant has a complaint, a lot of times I blame the owner. When the owner has a complaint, I blame the tenants, right? So like you can sometimes get them to do the things that you want them ultimately to do or that you know they should do. Mm-hmm. So as a perfect example, I had an email this morning from a owner who was a little upset with us because he was getting complaints from a neighboring property that the property was relatively dirty. There was trash that was strewn about, and the grass was very high. Okay. Mm-hmm. In the opposite situations, I get situations from owners that say, "Why is my bill for landscaping so high?" Right? Because the solution to this problem is to mow more frequently. But then instead of having a happy person, you have a happy situation where you just paid extra money for landscaping that maybe you didn't need to. So our job is really to try to balance everything. So in our specific instance, like a lot of people say, I want to mow every week. Well, we know that in the springtime and the fall that makes sense, but in the summer it doesn't make any sense. And so then we say, well, why don't we do 10 days? And what I've always pushed back and say, we're going to do it every other week. You do a schedule. You can say it's Friday, every other Friday. And so all our landscapers do that. But I looked at my grass today and it was like almost a foot high and I mowed it 2 weeks ago, not even 2 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. So I get it. But those are situations where you just explain to the owner, hey, look, like our landscapers are going out there. We do it every 2 weeks to try to save you money because we're trying to be good stewards of the property. We'll deal with the complaints from the tenants and complaints from the neighboring properties. And what we'll do is we'll talk to the landscaper to find out when he's going out there so that we can provide you with that detail. But that's really what we're trying to do. That's our product. Our product is not managing property. Our product is managing the expectations of the owner and to provide them with a good outcome. Because I don't lift a hammer, so how am I actually managing the repairs of a property? So it really is, it's about the coordination activities that we do and trying to give them a good outcome.
Makes a lot of sense. That's a good way to look at it. So what should ownership look for in a building that they're purchasing?
Yeah, so it depends on the situation. So if this is for smaller properties, I would say you want to look for things that you would personally want in that property. So the way I always like to look at it is you want as many people as humanly possible to be excited about renting your property. If that's the case, you're going to win. So I always say that there's 6 things and possibly 7. Someone convinced me that there might be a 7th. But the acronym that I used was PPPLLL, just to make it real simple. So the first is parking. If you have a person that has a BMW, they're not going to necessarily want to be on the street. So some people really value off-street parking. So the next one is price, and that one you control. You can decide that you want to charge $1, and you could say you want to charge $1 million. We know that $1 million would never get rented, but even a property in the worst part of Hartford would rent for $1 to someone that probably is over 700 credit score. Because for a price, a great person would be willing to rent even the worst property. So you control the price. The next P is pets. And so we always advocate for owners to have pets because something like 60 to 70% of the population at this point has a cat, has a dog, has something. It's very in vogue right now. So if you have a situation where you say no pets, you're going to lose because you're limiting yourself to something like 1/3 of the population naturally. Then the three L's are location. So if you're in a really bad part of town, even if you have great parking and allow pets and have the other two that I'm going to say shortly, you still could have people that decide that they don't want to rent that. Being on a busy street, we manage a property that's right next to a liquor store, right? So it's a perfectly good property, but because of where it's located, people don't really want to rent there, right? Because you've got vagrants that just walk by. The next one is laundry. I have 6 kids, and so if I was ever renting a property, I would want laundry on site. The thought of every week or 2 weeks going for a few hours to a laundromat does not appeal to me. It does not appeal to some subset of the population. And so having either the ability for laundry on site or having laundry on site is appealing to some people. And the last one is layout. Some properties that I've seen, for example, have a sink in a pantry, so not actually in the kitchen area. Another in that same property has 1 bedroom and 3 baths, and the bathroom is between the 2 bedrooms. So if someone in that 3rd bedroom needs to use the bathroom in the middle of the night, they have to go and interrupt one of these other people in their bedroom to go use the bathroom. The layout just is funky.
That's not good.
And so, I know that. So when I'm buying property, I'm always looking at that. And if I have that's weird, you're not going to win because other people are going to have that same feeling. And instead of them thinking this is a great place to live, they're going to say, why the heck was there a bathroom between 2 bedrooms? And you've lost at that point.
Yeah.
The 7th item that we talk about now is a little bit of a backyard for barbecuing, for having people over, things like that. Some people value having some space to, have people, entertaining people. So those are the things that I personally look for when I'm buying property, and I want to have as many of them as possible. And if it has a bunch of those that are missing, if the location's bad, if ultimately the parking stinks, I'm going to walk away because I know it's so much harder to rent that property. You're going to have higher vacancy. You're going to have to take worse tenants, and it's just not going to be a good situation. So I always look for those 7 things every time I'm looking at property. So that's for smaller property. For bigger property, you're looking for, it's more location-based. It's amenities. It's how much work is needed. It's can you standardize things like the kitchens and the bathrooms and the layouts. A lot of those would be my consideration for bigger properties. But similarly, you're going to want to have laundry, good parking, all of that type of stuff as well in those situations.
Got it. What's your opinion on laundry in the units?
So I'm mixed. I think laundry in the unit is good. Though I am a person that hates laundry in kitchens. I think that a lot of properties, it's just weird. So I try to avoid that as much as possible. I actually have no problem with doing laundry in the basement. A lot of times I think it can work well. We have had situations where you have things leak, right? They don't tighten down all of the the valves and stuff leaks. And so if you have it in unit, you're more at risk of having a major issue than if you have it in the basement. But I'm mixed. If there's no laundry within a specific unit, I would put it in the basement.
Got it. And bedrooms. Do you consider a bedroom if it doesn't have a closet?
So for me, the definition of a bedroom is a closet. It does have a closet. So anytime that I'm going to market a property as having a bedroom, if there is no closet in there, I'm going to put a closet in there, even a little one. Mm-hmm. It's one of those things that I actually think provides a lot of value to a property because, again, you don't want these situations where people are like, that's funny. How is this a bedroom and there's no closet in here, right? Mm-hmm. So generally, I have a property that I purchased, a 5-family, and there was common like a coat closet that people used as a regular closet. Mm-hmm. And anytime those tenants move out, I will add a small closet in each of the bedrooms.
Mm. How big is a small closet?
I forget what the size, basically in the length direction and the width direction. The width, it usually has to be at least like a hanger, right? Because you're going to put a pole.
Yeah.
So I don't know what that is, maybe 2 feet. So it can be that wide, or depth 2 feet. And then the width of it, I think you really kind of base it on things like window layouts and stuff. You obviously don't want to obstruct a window because that's just terrible. And so looking at the layout of the room, you kind of make a judgment based on what makes the most sense to make the room not look unappealing.
Got it. So a little bit smaller than the closet we're currently in.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty small.
Do you have any mentors or key people that you've learned from?
Yeah, so a lot. My brother, Luke, who was the person that I incubated, was one of my mentors, and still is my mentor today. I definitely ask him questions about business and things like that. My dad, I'd say, is a mentor in inspiring us and my family to work hard and to do this crazy thing called real estate. But then, like, more recently, I have a lot of other mentors that are within the industry. So a lot of the top property management companies are people that are mentors to me. And I am able to do masterminds and things with them frequently. And then what I actually have for mentors are people that don't even know that they're my mentors, or I'm their mentors, or mentee. So there's plenty of people in our space that share. And I go into a lot of webinars, do a lot of podcasts, love to share to others. I read a lot of books. And so some of my mentors are people that wrote books, because you can gain so much knowledge and wisdom from them without them even having to build into you. So I would say I have like in-person mentors that I can call upon, but then I also have people that I can read their book and understand a topic that I really need to know to improve myself and or to improve the business.
Great. What emerging trends are you excited about in property management?
So over the past few years, we've really been leveraging a lot of technology, and technology continues to be a very important part of the client experience, and resident experience. And so I remember, even my dad, I think he still collects rent manually. He gets checks in the mail. Wow. Right. And so that's something that's relatively easy to do, is to receive ACH payments. Right. Mm-hmm. For a lot of the things that I do is I don't even pay many checks anymore. Our system allows us to automatically pay out through ACH processes. So a lot of that improvement not only saves you time and money, but just makes a better experience for people, because instead of them having to get the check and go to the bank, now it just automatically deposits into their account. So those are things that I think have been happening over the last 5 to 10 years. The use of email, instead of having to do phone calls so much, text messages, YouTube videos have been very helpful in being able to help people learn how to do things like flip a breaker, which maybe they didn't know in the past. I think for the future, the big enhancements, though, a lot of them are around AI, automation, ChatGPT, things like that. We're strong. There's two kind of camps in our property management space. There's one that says to automate everything, build processes for everything. And there's one that says it's all about the experience. And so I'm more of the camp of the experience. And so a lot of people would say, well, you don't need to have as many physical touches, because ultimately it doesn't matter. Just give them the content. And for some people that works, but some people want a phone call, right? And so telling a client that, hey, I'm not going to call you because that's not what I do, you turn off some proportion of the population. So utilizing a tool like AI, it can be very, very helpful. So one of the things that we also do, I'm using AI right now as a coaching tool. And so what that means is, as an entrepreneur, I get inundated all the time with these, hey, can I have a second? What would you do in this situation? And people are not really learning they're just throwing their monkey at you and telling you to solve it, right? To fix their monkey. And so what I've been doing is saying, okay, well, when there's a problem, I want you to go in ChatGPT, ask ChatGPT what some solutions are. I want you to read them. I want you to think about them. And then I want you to tell me in the email, what was the question? What was some of the solutions? What was the solution you picked and why? And from there, I'm able to then coach people into being more effective in their jobs, because instead of them just asking me all the time, they're literally coming up with their own solutions and starting to use the discernment in their brain to understand what is a good solution or what is not. And then I can teach them why it's a bad solution instead of answering their question. So that's one of the things that I'm personally doing is leveraging it. And I basically, anytime someone says, hey, Sam, here's my question, I'm like, nope, ChatGPT, give me some answers to what you think could be good, and then pick which one you think is the best, and then we'll talk about that.
Have you ever heard of the 1-3-1 rule?
Maybe, but I don't know if I've heard it in that term. So what is the 1-3-1 rule?
So 1-3-1 rule is one defined question or a defined problem also. You come up, you ask your employee or whoever is working on it, what are 3 potential ways that we can solve this problem? And then select one for me. And then you obviously review the 3 options, look at the one they select, and it's a way for them to kind of...
Sounds like that's what I'm doing, but no, I've never heard of it that way.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep. It's a different strategy, but sounds very similar.
But I love that with ChatGPT, there's no excuses, right? Where in the past, they'd have to come up with their own solutions, and it might be very difficult. Now you can just say, give me 3 potential solutions,
Yeah.
right? And so it's speeding up the process of learning if you can utilize the tool well, so that they're not sitting there twiddling their thumbs trying to come up with 3 solutions.
Have you trained your own ChatGPT, or is it more just you just open up a new window every time?
I personally haven't. That is something that we're thinking about doing. The problem is, I think there's certain ways still to jailbreak any GPT, and so I've heard of things where people have jailbreaked like bot GPTs and gotten like refunds, gotten free plane tickets because they did certain things that maybe were off normal that they weren't supposed to. And so I, for those reasons and others, like I haven't exactly gotten there. One of the things about me is I, in general, like to wait for something to be mature and well established, get all the bugs out and see how people are using it really effectively. And then I lean into it very heavily. So the mantra that my grandfather used to say was, when they invent color TV, I'll buy black and white. So it's just, I'll let them figure out the kinks and kind of get it to be really good, and then I'll implement that. So
Got it. I worry when it actually goes out into the wild and can do its own thing.
that's my big fear. So keep it constrained for now.
For sure. And so how do you stay informed and continue learning in property management?
Sure.
Are there any resources or networks that you'd recommend?
Yeah, so I'm part of a community called NARPM, which is the National Association of Residential Property Management. So I do that very significantly. Pretty much all of the people that I associate with are NARPM members. It's a great organization. We share best practices. We're always trying to help others. So that's one that I'm very active in. I'm also very active in local ones. So there's one called the CTPOA, Connecticut Property Owners Alliance. They're very much there for trying to advocate for owners against really, really bad resident or tenant-friendly laws that could be trying to be passed in Connecticut. So some of the things that they're trying to do are things like getting rid of lapse of time evictions. Other things are like rent control in Connecticut. And so we think that would be very detrimental to our clients. Even though I think it's positive for property management, making a lot of extra administrative burden, I personally don't want to see the state go down that path. And so I advocate for that. So I'm always very in the know on what bills are being proposed and what bills are potentially being approved. And so we're trying to do our best to advocate against those bills with a lot of legislators, but also trying to, we started a super PAC to try to specifically go after ones that are at risk of losing their seat so that everyone knows that we could be eyeing them. So some of the things that we're ultimately doing, and that allows me to stay very informed on, best practices, trends, both in property management as well as locally.
Got it. Are there any bills we should be concerned about?
So most of all the bills did not get passed this year. It was a shorter session. And so what that means is it's harder for things to pass. So I don't think any did. We were finally able to get like the National Association of Realtors on our side in some cases to advocate against bills. And so none passed this year. But again, that doesn't mean that we're not going to continue doing the things that we do to try to have people realize that they could be a target if they continue to misbehave by proposing these really bad laws. So, but none that I heard that are going to affect anything. With that said, last a year ago, probably 10 or 15 bills got passed that were detrimental to our state. Things like late fees are the most. I don't think there's a state in the nation that has a more arcane late fee policy now.
Really?
And I don't think so. When it passed, I said that it immediately invalidated the late fee on every single lease. Yeah, the late fee is the minimum, so you have to figure out what the calculation is in different scenarios so that you could select the minimum. The minimum of $5 a day with a max of $50 or 5%. So let's say that the rent is $500 and they don't pay the rent. Well, 5% is $25, but it's the minimum of $5 a day with a max of $50 or 5%. So you charge the first day $5.
Yep.
The next day, $5. Once it gets to 5%, you stop charging.
Oh.
Because it's then at that point, the minimum is $25. Because it's 5%.
That's the current law?
That's the current law. And there's other rules about if it's a Section 8 tenant, you can only charge them for their unpaid portion. Mm-hmm. There's all sorts of things like that. And then the technical law is that if you start an eviction on a tenant with a notice to quit, what that really means is that you're telling them that they have invalidated the lease and you want them to leave. Mm-hmm. Well, if the lease is no longer valid, how can you charge them per the lease for a late fee? So whereas we used to just say on the 11th, before I even do a notice to quit, I'm going to charge you a percentage of the late fee one time and we're done with. Now you can't. You have to physically calculate it. We have to calculate every single one of our late fees manually every single month.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's the most arcane rule ever in the entire nation, and I built a big spreadsheet. So again, I have a background in nuclear engineering. I asked ChatGPT to help me. It's impossible to get it right because the other thing that happens is a tenant will pay, but they can't pay the full portion. So then they'll pay a portion. So how do you calculate what the late fee is if it's a percentage if they paid a portion and that portion changed? Right, because if they owed $1,000, but then they paid half the rent of $500, well, 5%, is it 5% of the $1,000? Is it 5% of the $500? Because in one case I can get to 50, the other case I can only get to 25.
Interesting.
But again, I tried to somewhat figure this out, and it spent hours and hours and hours, and I can't get it right. I have no idea because it's literally there's no one that can determine what really the right way is.
So I've done the $50 late fee on my properties and have gone to the eviction court, and they didn't say anything about it.
When?
Within, I'd say about 8 months ago, a year ago.
October was when it went to effect. So it might be
this year.
Of last year.
Of last year, got it. So maybe it was just before that.
Yeah. So you probably would have been okay. But even them, the judges don't even really know what the rules are. And the judges don't even care, to be honest with you. They all over the place, they'll invalidate our contracts.
Really?
Yeah, all the time. Like, so for example, if you ever go to an eviction, I've seen one where they'll say things like, why don't you just use the security deposit to cover rent this month? Mm-hmm. Well, the security deposit in the lease is very clearly stated for wear and tear that occurs to the property. It's not to be used for rent, except for if it's the last month. But they say specifically, just use it for it.
Yeah.
So they do all sorts of things like that where they don't even care. They don't even look at the lease. They just try to adjudicate to make both parties not really angry. That's their philosophy. Mm-hmm. And which is sad because, we as landlords, as housing providers, I like to use more than landlords. We're just trying to basically get the tenants to pay rent so that we can cover our expenses and have them have a good place to live. Mm-hmm. But what ends up happening when you have these judges do these type of things, it hurts the really good residents who pay on time. Because in multiple ways. One, because we're now subsidizing this bad resident who ended up not paying, even though we had to pay taxes, insurance, principal, interest, all these things. These other good tenants have to subsidize the bad tenants. It's like an insurance policy almost. When you have insurance, you have some people that are going to make claims and they're not really worth insuring. and there's others that aren't. And that's what our screening criteria does. We're trying to say who's worth taking a risk on. So that's the first thing that happens is these great tenants end up subsidizing the bad tenants by having to pay more than they would if we had a more fair eviction process. And if we could evict people faster, then rents would go down. The second thing is because evictions take so long, and I don't know if you experience this with yours, the resident, when they know they're being evicted, become emboldened. Like I had one that they stopped picking up after their dog and the poop that went everywhere, including the stairwell, including in their unit. They just give up. They don't care anymore.
Yep.
And then when they do that, they harass the other tenants too because they don't care. And so like all of this, professional courtesy goes away. And instead of it only being a 2 or 3 or 4 week process, because evictions are faster in some states, it's a 3, 4, 5, 6 month process sometimes.
Yeah.
And so like these great tenants are hurt by these other residents. I like to use the word residents, not tenants either. But these great residents are hurt by these, non-paying residents. And it hurts those good residents. And that's what really pains me.
It does. And I've run into that myself where they stop caring. It becomes an adversarial relationship as soon as you say, hey, we need to discuss you moving out potentially, but then when they tie you up in court, and then good luck suing for the back rent. Yeah. And God forbid they ruin the apartment on the way out.
Yep.
I don't know. Has that ever happened to you?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. People don't take care of it as well. They'll punch holes in walls. They'll break stuff. Purpose. Yeah. All sorts of things like that happen. Like, again, we try to humanize them. And what that means is they are humans, right? And so, but a lot of the mentality is more adversarial. And I try to remember, look, they're in a bad situation, right? Like, we don't wish that we could be in their situation right now. And so they're acting out because of that. Yeah. And so, but if you have that mentality and you're very positive, you'll find that you don't, in general, get it as bad as it could be. When you get into tit for tat, you're stuck. What I also say is, so one of the things that I do with my property management company is my perspective is always that people are good, they're just misunderstood. And people are good and they have great intentions, but they have bad execution. I don't think anyone ever says, I'm going to stiff this owner. What they say is...
Unless they're in California.
Yeah, correct. I mean, there's some cases where people are just that awful of individuals, but I don't think in general anyone says, I'm specifically not going to pay this owner. What ends up happening is they don't have enough money, and they have to decide where to put that money, and they decide not to pay it to the owner, right? So, and then they'll say things like, hey, I'll pay you next week. And they have an intention of paying you. They're not lying, but their execution is poor. And so what we always try to do, what I explain to my people is, it's actually helping people to be really hard on collections and to start evictions quickly. Because if you give them grace, all that they'll do is then, instead of paying rent, they're going to pay their credit card bill, their auto bill, their other bill, and then we're going to end up having to evict them. Because if a person gets too far behind, eventually it flips and it says, well, I'm already too far behind. Why don't I just not pay? I'll save my money, and then I'll have money for the next property. So the goal is to not let them get past basically 1 month behind. If you do that, you're going to have a lot better luck with your collections. But if you think you're being good, you hear these sob stories, and you give people grace all the time, they're going to continue to push back further and further and further. So you really want to take a hard stance on evictions, that is the responsibility. And this law that passed with respect to late fees, for me, it's doing a disservice to the residents, because I start evictions sooner than I would. And the reason is because if a credit card late fee or a late fee for your car is more expensive than a late fee for your house, then you're going to pay off whichever one has the highest late fee. So I want the late fee to hurt so that the person prioritizes that bill first. So the only other solution that I have now is I start evictions basically on the 11th. And historically, I used to do it on the 15th or the 16th. Wow. So now 4 or 5 days that they would have had before, they don't have, because the fact that for my owners, I need to make sure that they're prioritizing rent.
So you send out the notice to quit day 11.
Somewhere between 11 and 14, depending on which one it falls. Yeah.
Interesting. I've not done that, obviously. Getting back rent of 2-3 months could be, that was the first lesson that I learned when I first started. But what do you look for in a tenant? Do you go for the 3x rent to income ratio, no collections, certain credit score? Like, what are you looking for?
Yeah. So my philosophy on it is it's a multi-step process, but the most important thing is that they can afford the rent. So the first thing we're looking for is that they have a good job. We're looking generally for 3x, but sometimes you don't need to do 3x. If everything's included, heat, hot water, then they don't have as much payment to those utilities. Well, you don't need to do a 3x. You could probably do a 2.5x. Credit's the second most important, right? Like we've had people that have 700 credit scores that don't make a lot of money. I'm not giving them that property because whether or not they will pay is contingent on how much money they make. And even people with good credit, if they don't make enough money, they're eventually it's going to end up biting them. So the single biggest thing is the amount of money they make. We're usually looking for 6 times rental rate. You know, if you have a married husband and wife, I mean, you want it to be even a little bit higher because they have higher costs because there's 2 people. So that's the first. Credit score, we don't really look at the number, but we look at the cause of the credit. So, you know, I've put in a 400 something. I put a 500 something in a house. The guy had one negative item on his credit. It was a $25 bill to a medical bill. $25. He didn't even know that was on his credit. He wasn't abusing it. So I gave him a house, 500 credit score. And so so you could see it in whether or not people abuse it. I saw someone with a 650 that I would never rent to. They contested every single item on their credit report. And if you have a $25 medical bill, do you think that company's gonna actually spend the time to say that it actually is a correct account? Yeah. And no, they're not gonna do it. It's not worth the $25. It's not worth it, right? So they're just not going to say it, and it's going to come off their credit. So if you look at a credit report and you see everything is contested recently, I would absolutely walk away from that person, right? So that's something that I look out for. But what we're generally looking for is things that we think are positively correlated to them being a bad tenant. And those would be prior evictions, certain criminal, I would say violent and sex offense. We would do that because obviously it's difficult if you have like other children in a property. Yeah. So violent crimes, sex offense, we would reject. Evictions, I would say car repossessions is another, because how can a person work a job if they can't pay for their car? And last but not least is utilities. If you have a utility bill to Eversource, C&G, you know, United Illuminating, any of those places, how are you taking care of a property if you're not keeping the lights on? So those are the big ones that we look at. Things that are like a student loan debt, things like medical bills, we found are not correlated to a negative experience with people and they're paying their rent. So we'll discount things like that if you're late on student loan or late on medical.
Really good insight. Thank you. So let's go to the favorites. You a coffee guy?
No, I'm not. Not at all, really.
So you don't have a favorite coffee
No,
shop?
I don't. I mean, Starbucks, Dunkin' Donuts, they're all basically the same to me. Again, my issue, like we started the show with, is I get jittery. I'm already high strung as it is. I get up early in the morning, and if I did coffee, it would literally, I'd be wired all day. I drink it once a week on Sundays at church because they have free coffee, since it's something I do. But no, I don't really have a favorite coffee shop.
Okay. Matcha, though? It's a slow caffeination. It gives you that zoned in feeling, and then it slowly tapers off, no crash.
Huh.
We'll try it.
We'll have to.
Yeah, we'll try it next time. What is your favorite restaurant?
So I'm a pretty simple person. I've always loved Chipotle. I just think it's fantastic. It's
Classic.
relatively good for you. If it has to be something a little bit fancier, I'm always like a quantity over a quality to certain levels. But I think like Chipotle, you can balance that sometimes pretty well. I think there's like places like Sushi House, which has like all you can eat sushi, and I think they in general do a pretty good job. So I like to go to places like that sometimes with my wife. I would say those are some of my favorite restaurants. We're really enjoying going to Sicily in Middletown, which is a really good pizza place. Dave Portnoy just visited there recently. I haven't seen what the number he gave it, but they have a pizza called the Sicily, and it is delicious. So that's another place that we do enjoy going to.
We'll have to try it.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
What is your favorite book that you've read?
So there's a lot of them. I'm a big reader. What I realize, especially as I've been doing property management the last year or so, is that I hit my limit, my natural limit of where I could take the company. They say a couple things. They say, one, you get the business you deserve. And they also say that the plateaus that you have in your business are related to your own limitations as a person. And so I hit some plateaus in our business. And so what I did about that was I did a lot of books to develop myself. So some of them are ones from an author named Ben Hardy. He did some called like Who Not How, Gap in the Gain. He did one called 10X is Easier Than 2X. I'm probably missing a couple others, but he's a big on organizational psychology, how to hack yourself. And then there's a lot of business books that I've been reading. I'm on a kick with Peter Lencioni. He does Death by Genius is one. He also has a book called 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and his latest book is called The 6 Working Geniuses. So those are really good books for organizations to kind of improve from a leadership and culture perspective. There's a book called Traction, which is about EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System, which was fantastic. I'm sure I'm missing other ones. There's a guy, that one's from Gino Wickman. There's another one I really like called what was it called? Buy Back Your Time, from Dan Martell. And that's all about hiring people to replace things that you don't like as you kind of step up in business and make more and more money on a per hour basis. So those are a couple of the books that I enjoy. Like I said, I just read a book called Checklist Manifesto, which was really good. So I have a lot of them, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I think those are all great books for property managers.
Sure.
Right? And is there anything specific to property managers that they should read?
So one thing that I would say, and this is going to bore a lot of people, but there's a book from Greg Crabtree. There's 2 of them. One's called Simple Numbers 1.0, and I think one's called Simple Numbers 2.0. The basis for our industry standards, we have accounting standards, comes from that book. And then from that developed a number of like financial metrics to define those industry standards or those standards that they're using. And then from there came benchmarks. And so NARPM has a number of papers that are related to that information. And I would say understanding your numbers and understanding what that stuff means is the single biggest reason that my company is doing as well as we're doing. Because it allows you to understand how you're doing relative to your peers. And it also gives you the clarity to be able to make financial decisions based on, the benchmark, but also based on your own capabilities and things. So I would say, it's boring for most, but being knowledgeable on those papers that our industry has was probably the single most important thing that I've done to get to where I am today.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming over here and meeting with me and doing this podcast. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's fun.
Yeah, I think we've gotten a lot of good insight from you, and I really appreciate it.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Join the Mammoth family.
Thank you.